Okay, so the first thing we do is we're going to do creaming of the butter and of the sugar. Now you do need to have quite soft margarine or butter, so you can see it's really soft here, and you're going to be using a wooden spoon and you add the sugar into the bowl. Now with this method of creaming, you're going to be really making sure that you incorporate the sugar into the butter, and you need to use a wooden spoon and beat the sugar and the butter together, cream the sugar and the butter together, so that you end up with a really nice white creamy light mixture. Right, so now what you're going to do is you're going to beat your eggs into the mixture a little bit at a time, and I would normally do this in 3 separate parts. Now the way to beat is by using a wooden spoon and mixing quite vigorously the egg into the fat and the sugar mixture. And the reason you need to do this quite firmly is because the egg, which is made of protein, and the fat in the butter do not like to mix together very well. And what you can end up with is a bit of curdling, and that is where you get a strange texture affecting your mixture. Now this texture doesn't change the taste of your cake. It does look a bit odd, but you can beat it out, and while you're beating, you're always incorporating more air into your mixture. So once you have beaten the eggs in, you can now start to add the flour, and this process is called folding in the flour. Before we do that, we need to get a teaspoon of baking powder, and the best way to do that is to use measuring spoons, and getting your palette knife, you can create the correct level of baking powder, and that can be added directly into your flour mixture. So the baking powder will also help your cake to rise, because that will be a chemical reaction that happens in the heat of the oven and producing more CO2. So you should get a nice, even, light sponge. Now at this stage you are going to change your spoon. So you're going to take your wooden spoon out and you're going to transfer to a tablespoon, which is a metal spoon. You're also going to sieve the flour in bit by bit. Now we need to sieve the flour in again because we're going to try and incorporate the air into the mixture. So as the flour is going through the sieve, it travels through the air and it captures particles of air, and that will then get mixed into the cake. Again, this will help with the rising of the cake in the oven. So in order to fold the flour in, we need to use a metal spoon, and we create a figure of 8 mixture like so, just folding that flour in. Strangely enough, we do not want to mix it vigorously because we don't want to knock any of that air out that you have so carefully been trying to add with all the other mixtures. Okay, once all the flour is folded, you can add some flavouring to this. Now it doesn't say this on the recipe, but it's nice to have the vanilla essence added. If you want to make a lemon cake or a lemon sponge, you could add lemon essence at this stage. So you're just going to very carefully fold in the essence, and then you're ready to divide the cake mixture evenly between your 2 baking trays. Okay, hello girls and boys. Today we are going to be looking at our Victoria sponge recipe, so you will find it in the recipe books there. So the first thing you will need is you need 2 baking trays, and they do need to be lined with some baking parchment. You also will need to make sure that you grease them really well. So I tend to put a bit of butter on some kitchen paper and make sure I go round all of the edges and grease the bottom as well. Then you add your parchment on top of that, and you have nicely greased baking trays. Okay, so once the cakes come out of the oven, they should be quite even and nicely risen. You need to leave them to cool for a little bit so that you can touch the baking trays. And then what you're going to be doing is you're going to be using a palette knife, and you're going to be going around the edge of your cake, making sure that you can release it from the edge. Okay, so now you can turn your cake out, and it should come out fairly easily, remembering that you do need to peel off the backing paper. So once you have done that to both cakes, you then can choose which one you want on the top. So I'm going to go for this one because it is slightly more even. So I get a plate and I place my Victoria sponge on the plate. Then I'm going to get my jam, and you can use a spoon or a palette knife, and you've got to do this fairly carefully though, because it's not quite as solid as bread. It can be a bit delicate, particularly if it's still slightly warm from the oven. So just very carefully use your palette knife and spread the jam evenly over the cake. Now you can also add at this stage some cream, whipped cream or butter icing, depending on what you would like to have in your cake. So once you have spread the jam nice and evenly over the base, you then can add your top layer of your sandwich. And at this stage, your cake should be well balanced and nice. So now you can decorate the top. You can use one of these doilies you might be able to find in your grandma's kitchen and cut a hole in it to make a stencil, or you can make your own stencil if you would like. And all I then do is add some icing sugar over the top. Now I'm using an icing sugar dredger, but if you don't have one of these, you could just use a sieve to sieve your icing sugar on. So basically you're going to make sure that your icing sugar comes out. And then, there we go, that's a bit better. Make sure it's nicely covered. And hopefully your stencil will leave a nice pattern on the top. Okay, so there is your finished Victoria sponge.